They tore down my family's farm fields to make their pretty neighborhood garden. They never knew I had papers showing I owned the whole county. What would you do if you found out you had the power to make your pushy neighborhood group pay? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The sound of a car door closing woke me up from my nap on the porch. I opened my eyes and saw a woman in a neat white suit walking up my rocky driveway. Her shoes sank a little with each step. My old farm dog, Buster, gave a small bark and then went back to sleep. "Excuse me, you there?" she called, holding up a bright yellow paper. "Are you the person who owns this place?" I stood up slowly, stretching my back after working on the water pipes all morning. "Yes, ma'am. I'm John Peterson. My family has had this farm for many years. How can I help you?" She looked me up and down, clearly not liking my dirty jeans and work boots. "I'm Susan Jones, the leader of the Pleasant Hills Neighborhood Group. This is a warning," she said, pushing the paper toward me. I took it, really confused. My 600 acres of farmland had been here long before the new Pleasant Hills houses had been built across the road last year. "A warning, ma'am. I'm not in your neighborhood group." I looked over at my grandpa's barn. Sure, the red paint was old and coming off, but it was still strong and did what it was supposed to. "This barn has been here since 1937, and now it's 2025. Mr. Peterson, things change. We want it painted or taken down in 30 days, she said, pointing to the paper. "It's all written there, with the possible fines." I felt angry, but kept my voice calm. "I think there's been a mistake. Your neighborhood rules don't apply to my land." Susan's face got hard. "We'll see about that. By the way, what are you growing over there?" She pointed to my east field, where my wheat was starting to grow. "Winter wheat, same as always." She wrote something on her phone. "Interesting. The group will want to know about this." Without another word, she turned and walked back to her fancy SUV. I watched her leave, then looked at the warning. It had a real-looking stamp and said there would be a $200 fine every day. At the bottom was a note that said, "We should talk about the east part. Call me SJ." I crumpled the paper and put it in my pocket. These city people moving to the country always thought they could tell us farmers what to do. I had work to do. That night, while I was cooking dinner, my phone rang. It was Bob Williams, my friend from childhood who now worked for the county. "John, are you sitting down?" Bob sounded worried. "What's wrong? A snake in your office again?" I laughed, remembering when a small snake had made Bob jump onto his desk. "I wish. Listen, something strange just happened. Susan Jones from that new neighborhood came in with some papers about your east field. She was getting permits." I stopped stirring my food. "Permits for what?" "A neighborhood garden, a pool, and tennis courts, John. She's saying that part of your land belongs to them. She says it was never measured right when your grandpa bought the land next to it." "That's crazy. I have the papers in my file cabinet right now." "Well, she had papers too. Something looks wrong, but they were stamped and filed the right way. They're going to start clearing land tomorrow morning." I tried to stop it, but she had all the right signatures. "Something's not right, John. You better find those papers tonight." As I put them on the kitchen table, looking at the property lines, everything looked right, just like it had been for many years. The east field was clearly ours. But then I saw something. The newest measurement, done just 5 years ago when I had thought about selling a small piece but didn't, showed a small difference on the east side. Not much, just about 15 feet different from the first measurement. I had not worried about it then, thinking it was just better equipment. Could Susan have used this tiny difference to take more of my land? I called Bob back, but it went to his voicemail. Then I tried the police. "Sheriff David speaking." "Sheriff, it's John Peterson from Peterson Farm. I think someone's going to illegally destroy part of my wheat field tomorrow morning." There was a long pause. "Ah, John, yeah, I got a call about that today. It sounds like there's a problem with the property line with that new neighborhood. It's not a problem, Sheriff. They're trying to steal my land. Now, John, let's not accuse people. I'll tell you what. I'll come out first thing tomorrow and make sure everything's legal before any machines start. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a little better. Sheriff David had gone to school with my dad. He'd make sure things were done right. As the sun went down, I sat on my porch, watching the lights come on in the big houses across the road. What was Susan really after? The Eastfield couldn't even be seen from their neighborhood. Then it hit me. Water. My land controlled the water from Carson Creek, which ran through the back of my land. The neighborhood had been having water problems all summer. I'd heard people talking about it at the store. Were they trying to get to the creek? Just before sunrise, I fell asleep at the kitchen table, with papers all around. I grabbed my phone to call him again, but before I could, the first bulldozer went through my fence and into my wheat field. I woke up to the sound of loud engines at 5:30 a.m. Not tractors. These were bigger and louder. I jumped out of bed, my heart beating fast, and put on my boots. Something was very wrong. I ran outside in my pajamas and saw 3 huge yellow bulldozers destroying my wheat field. The plants my family had carefully planted were being torn up and pushed into piles. My stomach dropped. Those plants were supposed to feed many people. "Hey, stop!" I shouted, running toward them, waving my arms. The people driving couldn't hear me over the loud engines. Then I saw them. Susan Jones and 5 other people in matching blue Pleasant Hills shirts standing by a white SUV at the edge of my property. They were all drinking coffee from matching cups, watching like it was a fun show. I walked over, mud getting on my pajamas. "What do you think you're doing? This is my land." Susan turned slowly, like she was surprised to see me on my own land. Her perfect hair didn't move as she looked at me. "Good morning," she said, like we were meeting for coffee. "We're finally fixing the neighborhood problem. The group voted and everyone agreed." I pointed at the bulldozers. "Tell them to stop right now. Those are my crops." Susan sighed, like I was a kid who didn't understand basic things. "Actually, according to county papers, this part was never yours. It's been neighborhood land for many years," she said. She pulled a folder from her bag and showed me a map with lines drawn in red. My land had been cut in half. "Well, these are the real papers," Susan smiled, closing the folder before I could really see it. "We're making something beautiful here. A neighborhood garden with flowers, a place to relax, and a fish pond. House prices will go up at least 8% once this is gone." The man next to her, who I knew was Mark Wilson from the neighborhood ads, nodded. "We've already sold benches to 15 families. We start building next week." I pulled out my phone and called the police. While it rang, I watched as the bulldozers went deeper into my field, destroying more of my crops. "You can't do this!" I shouted at Susan over the noise. "This is stealing and destroying things that belong to me." "It's progress," she said, turning to say something to a woman writing on a tablet. They all laughed. Sheriff David finally answered, and I told him what was happening. "They're destroying my crops right now. I need police here now." There was a long pause. "I understand you're upset," the sheriff said slowly. "But from what I'm seeing, this is a problem with property lines. We can't do anything without a court order." "What? They're on my land and destroying my property." "According to the papers I'm looking at," Sheriff David said slowly, "the property lines are not clear. I think you should call your lawyer." Something about how he talked made me feel strange. Sheriff David had known my family for years. Why was he acting like we were strangers? "I'll come by later to write a report," he added, then hung up before I could say anything. When I looked up, Susan was watching me with a smile. She knew how this talk had gone. "Everything okay?" she asked, sounding innocent. "The sheriff is coming," I lied, trying to sound sure. Susan's smile didn't go away. Great, he can see our papers. She gave me a stack of official-looking papers, all approved by the county last month. We tried to tell you about this at the neighborhood meeting, but you never come, do you? Because I don't live in your neighborhood, I shouted, feeling angry. I've lived on this farm my whole life. My grandpa built that barn with his own hands in 1932, and it's been making property values go down ever since, said Mark, looking at his watch. We have another meeting at 9. Will you be okay here? I watched as a bulldozer tore through the water system my dad had put in 30 years ago. Pipes broke, spraying water in the air. That's enough for today, Susan called to the people driving. We'll continue tomorrow. The bulldozers backed up, leaving deep tracks in my ruined field. 6 acres of wheat, almost a fifth of my year's money was gone. This isn't over, I said, my voice shaking with anger and sadness. Susan put a hand on my shoulder. I moved away. As Susan drove away, I saw Bob Williams's truck coming fast down my driveway. He jumped out, looking shocked. I just heard. I came as soon as I could, he said, looking at the damage. This is crazy. How could they get papers for this? Someone at the county office helped them, I said, feeling cold. But who would do that, and why? Bob shook his head. I don't know, but there's something else. On my way here, I saw people measuring at your north field. They had the Pleasant Hills logo on their truck. My blood went cold. They're not stopping with just this field. We need to figure out how they changed those property papers, Bob said. This isn't just about your farm anymore. If they can do this to you, they could do it to anyone. I finished, looking at the destroyed field. Back in my house, I went straight to my grandpa's old study. Behind a painting of our farm, there was a small safe I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the first property papers, surveys, and maps from when my great-grandpa first came to this county. What I found made my hands shake with anger and a strong feeling to do something. Susan and the neighborhood group had no idea who they were really messing with. And by this time tomorrow, they'd be sorry they ever came on my land. I couldn't sleep. The picture of bulldozers tearing up my wheat field kept coming to my mind. At sunrise, I got dressed and called Bob. I need every paper on the Pleasant View estates, I told him. Everything that could take weeks, Bob said. I need it by noon. 3 hours later, I was looking through county records at Bob's office. My coffee was cold, but I didn't notice. My hands shook as I looked through old folders from the 1920s. Found something, Bob called from his computer. The first land measurement from when your great-grandpa divided the county. And look who signed it. The name at the bottom made my heart race. Judge William Jones. Susan's great-great-grandpa, Bob said. He knew exactly where the property lines were. My phone buzzed with a text. The neighborhood group was having a special meeting tonight to talk about the next part of their neighborhood project. More of my land was in danger. Back home, I pulled a heavy box from my attic. It was filled with my grandpa's papers. Inside, I found a leather folder with gold writing. County Water Rights. I read it 3 times to be sure. The water lines that went to all of Pleasant View Estates ran through my property. My family had given permission, but with strict rules. My hands shook as I called my old college friend Lisa, now a lawyer in the city. How fast can you get here? I asked. What's wrong? She said. I'm about to fight with 200 angry homeowners. The Pleasant Hills neighborhood meeting room was full when I got there that night. I saw Susan at the front, wearing a blue jacket with the neighborhood logo. Her hair was perfect. She tapped her nails while waiting for everyone to sit down. I sat in the back row. Nobody noticed me. As you can see from these pretty pictures, Susan said, pointing to colorful posters, the next part will change another 10 acres of that ugly farmland into our new tennis area and walking paths. The crowd clapped, A man in golf clothes stood up. What about the farmer who lives there? Won't he complain? Susan waved her hand. Our lawyers have said that land was not his. It belongs to our neighborhood now. My blood boiled, but I kept my face calm. I waited for the right time. With the tennis area, our property values should go up by at least 15%, Susan said, smiling. We've already hired the bulldozers for next Monday. When she finally asked if anyone had comments, I slowly walked to the microphone. The room got quiet as people turned to look at me. Good evening, I said. I'm the farmer whose land you bulldozed yesterday and whose land you're planning to take on Monday. Susan's smile got smaller. Sir, this is a private neighborhood meeting. Before you continue with your plans, I said calmly, I'd like to tell you who I am. My name is John Peterson. My great-grandpa started this county in 1901. Our family has farmed here for over 100 years. Susan's face turned red. Some group members whispered to each other. Your great-grandpa checked our property lines, I said, which makes it interesting that you say my land was not mine. I switched to the next paper. Our family still owns the rights to minerals and water for every inch of land in a 30-mile area, including under your houses. The crowd made noises. That's just not possible, Susan said. Our neighborhood has all the right. I've spent a day with county officials, I interrupted, my voice still even. It seems your HOA has been operating without proper authorization for years. Your water supply runs through my land on easements that can be revoked with 30 days' notice. An older man stood up. Are you threatening to cut off our water? Susan stepped forward, her face red. We have documentation. Forged documentation, came a voice from the door. Everyone turned to see Sheriff David walking in, followed by Bob and 3 county officials. Bob carried a large cardboard box labeled Evidence. This meeting is now part of a formal county investigation, the sheriff announced. We have reason to believe property records were deliberately falsified. Chaos erupted. Homeowners shouted questions. Susan tried to regain control but was drowned out. The vice president of the HOA, a tall man named Doug, grabbed the microphone. This is ridiculous. We followed every legal process. People gasped. All eyes turned to Susan, who was frantically texting on her phone. Or why, Lisa continued. The property maps submitted to the county don't match the official surveys from any year since 1937. A woman with a baby stood up. Are we going to lose our homes over this? That's not my goal, I said, looking directly at her. But the destruction of my family's land has to stop, and the people responsible need to be held accountable. Susan suddenly pushed through the crowd toward the exit. Sheriff David nodded to a deputy who stepped in front of the door. Mrs. Jones, the sheriff said, we'll need you to stay for questioning. I gathered my documents, watching as frightened homeowners surrounded board members, demanding answers. This wasn't just about my land anymore. These people had been lied to as well. As I turned to leave, Doug grabbed my arm. You have no idea who you're dealing with, he hissed. Susan's husband is a state senator. This little stunt will cost you everything. I gently removed his hand. I'm not the one who bulldozed someone else's property based on forged documents. Outside, the night air felt cool on my face. I leaned against my truck, suddenly exhausted. This victory would be short-lived. Susan had connections and money. The real fight was just beginning, and she would come back harder than ever. My phone rang. It was Bob. You need to get back to your farm right now, he said, his voice urgent. Something's happening at your house. I jumped in my truck and sped home, heart pounding. As I crested the hill overlooking my property, I saw flashing lights, fire trucks, police cars, and in the distance, orange flames licking up the side of my century-old barn. They had hit back faster than I expected. I woke up to the sound of a drone buzzing over my farmhouse. Jumping out of bed, I grabbed my binoculars just in time to spot Susan herself controlling it from the edge of my property. She was mapping more of my land. For 3 straight weeks after the county meeting, the Pleasant Hills HOA had been attacking me from every angle. They'd frozen me out of local businesses. The grocery store owner suddenly couldn't order my favorite coffee. The hardware store claimed they were out of the tractor parts I needed. I wasn't going to let them win, not after what they did to my wheat field. When I drove into town that morning, people stared at me. A flyer was posted on the community board. Emergency homeowner meeting, addressing the farmland menace. My farm, where I grew food that fed half the county, was now being called a menace. "Don't let it get to you," said Bob, handing me a coffee as I entered his office at the county building. "I've been digging through old records all night. You won't believe what I found." My phone rang. It was Maria Gonzalez, a Pleasant View resident I'd met at the farmer's market. "They've cut off our water," she said, panic in her voice. "The HOA is claiming there's contamination from your farm. We have children and elderly people with no water." "That's impossible," I said. "Your water comes from the county supply, not according to the notice they put on our doors. It says we now need to buy bottled water from the HOA office at $20 per gallon until the farm contamination is resolved." I hung up, my blood boiling. Susan wasn't just coming after me anymore. She was using me as an excuse to profit off her own neighbors. When I got home, I found surveyors on another section of my property. Doug Wilson, the new HOA president, stood watching with his arms crossed. Susan had been forced to step down but was clearly still pulling the strings. "You're trespassing," I said calmly. "We have new documentation," Doug insisted, flanked by 2 security guards with Pleasant Hills patches. "This parcel was rezoned in 1997. It belongs to the community now." I studied their faces. These weren't professional surveyors. These were HOA board members pretending to be officials. "I'll give you exactly 1 minute to get off my land," I said. Little did they know I'd been recording too. Every word, every threat they'd made that night. The local news van pulled up to my farm. I'd called in a favor from an old school friend who was now a reporter. "We're investigating reports that the Pleasant Hills HOA has cut off water to its own residents," she said on camera, "and claims of illegal land seizure." I showed her the bulldozed field, the fake surveyor stakes, and, most damning of all, the water bills residents had been paying compared to actual county rates. The story aired at 6 p.m. By 7 o'clock, my phone was ringing non-stop. Pleasant View residents were furious, not at me, but at Susan and the HOA. The next morning, I watched from my kitchen window as county water trucks arrived at Pleasant View Estate. Bob had arranged emergency water delivery for the families affected by the HOA scheme. Then, something strange happened. A moving truck pulled up to Susan's house. Were they leaving? Had our pressure finally worked? My celebration was short-lived. That afternoon, I received notice that the HOA had filed a lawsuit against me, claiming my farm was causing environmental damage and reducing property values. They wanted $2 million in damages, plus immediate seizure of all my land. I called Bob immediately. "I need access to all property transactions in Pleasant View Estates for the past 5 years. What we discovered left us speechless. Susan and 3 board members had been buying properties throughout Pleasant View at below-market prices whenever a homeowner violated HOA rules. They'd created the rules specifically to force people out. And the community garden? It wasn't just about spiting me. The land they bulldozed sat directly above a natural spring, the most valuable water source in our drought-prone county. I called an emergency town meeting at the county courthouse. Every resident of Pleasant View Estates attended, along with farmers and townspeople from throughout the county. Standing before them, I revealed everything: the water price gouging, the property scheme, and, most importantly, The water rights grab. Your HOA has been charging you triple the normal water rates for years, I explained, showing their bills compared to county rates. They claimed it was county fees, but those fees go directly into board members' companies. I projected documents on the wall, showing the money trail. Susan and Doug tried to shout me down, but the evidence was too clear. There's more, I continued, pointing to the property map. The true property lines show that your garages, built 5 years ago, actually sit on my land. I've never complained, because I believe in being neighborly. The room erupted. Homeowners turned on Susan and Doug, demanding answers. And the biggest lie of all, I said when the noise died down, is that this is about property values or community gardens. It's about this. I projected an underground water survey map. They want the spring under my field. In our county, whoever controls water controls everything. Susan's face went white. She hadn't known I had access to the geological surveys. As the meeting dissolved into angry shouts, Sheriff David finally stood up. Based on the evidence presented, I'm opening an official investigation into the Pleasant Hills HOA board. Susan lunged for the door, but 2 deputies blocked her way. I caught Bob's eye across the room and nodded slightly. The trap had been set. Now it was time to close it. But as I walked to my truck that night, I spotted someone watching me from the shadows. This fight wasn't over yet. It was about to get much, much worse. The courtroom fell silent as the judge hit his gavel. Considering the proof, I find the Pleasant Hills HOA board guilty of faking papers and illegally taking land. Susan's face became red, and she stood up. This is crazy. Do you know who my husband is? The judge stopped her. Mrs. Jones, you're facing jail time and a $50,000 fine. One more word, and I'll add breaking court rules. Walking out, I was surrounded by news cameras. My story had spread quickly. How does it feel to win against the HOA that tried to steal your family farm? A reporter asked. This isn't just my win, I answered. It's for every homeowner they've pushed around with fake rules and hidden costs. A week later, papers appeared in every Pleasant View mailbox, showing Susan's secret expensive house purchases using HOA money. By evening, angry neighbors were demanding a new board be chosen. The new HOA president, Maria, knocked on my door the next day. We found out the truth about the water bill trick. We want to fix things. 3 months later, I watched neighborhood kids planting flowers along the property line, a living fence we designed together. Susan drove by in her moving truck, looking angry as her house sold for half its value. Your grandpa would be proud, Bob said, standing beside me. You didn't just save the farm. You taught a whole neighborhood what it means to be real neighbors.